The CEO smirked as he fired me, thinking he'd just stolen my life's work with a single signature. He didn't know I'd hidden a sunrise protocol inside the code years ago, so I walked out silently and waited for his world to go dark. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious, where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The projector hummed, a low, steady drone that seemed to fill the sudden silence in the Helen Systems boardroom. I had just walked the executive team through the final stage of Sentinel Core's defense mapping, the culmination of 7 years of sleepless nights and relentless coding. On the screen, the data streams were beautiful, green, stable, and impenetrable. Every eye in the room was fixed on the display, marveling at the architecture I had built from the ground up. Every eye, that is, except for Ryan Everett S. Ryan sat back in his plush leather chair at the head of the table, his arms folded across his chest. He was smirking, a subtle, tight twisting of his lips that suggested he knew exactly how this meeting was going to end long before I had even clicked the first slide. I moved to the next graphic, highlighting the AI's adaptive firewall cycle. This is where Sentinel auto-repairs after a breach simulation, I explained, my voice raspy from days of overuse. It took almost 7 years just to stabilize this protocol, but Beep. My badge light clipped to my lapel blinked red, a single harsh chirp that cut through the air. I froze, my hand hovered over the laptop. The boardroom didn't react. Not a single person gasped or looked confused. Not even the CTO, who had been nodding along enthusiastically just seconds ago, seemed surprised. He simply looked down at his notepad, suddenly finding the blank paper fascinating. I tried to click forward on the presentation. Nothing happened. The screen went dark, the complex beauty of Sentinel Core replaced instantly with the static gray Helen Systems logo. Then Ryan stood up. "Thank you, Eric, that'll be all," he said. His voice was loud and smooth, polished to a high sheen, like he was wrapping up a boring school assembly rather than terminating the chief architect of his company's flagship product. As of this morning, Helen is assuming full ownership of Sentinel Core. All operations moving forward will be led by internal teams. No warning, no explanation, no meeting with HR, just a knife to the back mid-sentence. I looked around the room, desperate for eye contact, for some acknowledgement of the insanity of this moment. I was met with blank stares. Even Carla, my own project manager for the last 5 years, the woman who had met my family, who knew the names of my children, didn't meet my eyes. She stared resolutely at a spot on the mahogany table, her jaw set tight. 14 years. 14 years of missed holidays, of overnight builds, of security audits at 3:00 a.m. while the rest of the world slept. And now they were pretending they hadn't just gutted me in public. The betrayal hit me physically, a cold knot tightening in my chest, heavier than the exhaustion I'd been carrying for months. It wasn't just a firing, it was an execution. A security guard I didn't recognize walked in from the side door. He didn't speak, he just placed a manila folder in front of me. I could see the edge of the document inside, my termination form, already filled out, dated for this exact minute. I didn't ask questions, I didn't argue. The air in the room was so thick with complicity that words felt useless. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear but from a sudden, overwhelming surge of adrenaline. I signed, I closed the folder. No one said a word. I stood up, adjusted my tie, and turned to Ryan. He was already looking down, pretending to check something important on his phone, dismissing me like I was a vendor who had delivered the wrong lunch order. "Ryan," I said, my voice was quiet, but it carried enough weight to force him to look up. He glanced at me, his eyes flat and unbothered. "You sure you checked clause 12.7, I asked. He blinked just once. It was a tiny micro-expression, the only crack in his entire performance. But it was there. He didn't answer, just stared until I turned my back. I walked out. I tried to press the button for the elevator, but the panel was dead to my badge. The upper floors were grayed out on the display. They had already scrubbed me from the system. I had to take the stairs down 2 levels to reach my office. When I opened the door to my workspace, half the screens already read Access D&IED in bold red letters, but everything else was still there, untouched. My nameplate, my server rack humming in the corner, my old coffee mug with the faded company logo from a decade ago. I shut the door behind me and locked it. It was the first time in 14 years I had ever locked that door. The room felt smaller than it ever had. It wasn't just quiet, it felt sealed like a tomb. It already knew this was goodbye. I tossed a cardboard box onto my desk and started grabbing whatever made sense. The rest could rot here, a few reference books, my server pass keys, the external drive labeled Core B red line. It was still warm to the touch. I had just used it before the meeting. Then the framed patent on the shelf caught my eye. US 8214374 Sentinel Core Adaptive Defense Protocol. My name was right there under inventor, Eric Langston, the only name. Helen Systems thought they owned that now. I picked it up, feeling the cold weight of the glass in my hands. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They looked at the code and saw a product to sell. I looked at the code and saw the DNA of the agreement I made years ago, an agreement that had teeth they didn't know existed. I didn't build Sentinel for them, I built it because no one else could. After working security for 12 years, I was sick of patching other people's holes. I wanted something airtight, and I made it. 14 years of black coffee, shredded contracts, and watching rookies come and go while I kept this entire operation from buckling under the weight of its own ambition. And Ryan Everett, he was the reason I had to build it so tough. Ryan wasn't an engineer, he was a legacy hire, the son of the co-founder who swept in after his father retired. Ryan didn't know a server from a toaster. He was polished, handsome in a generic corporate way, and completely hollow. He viewed Sentinel Core not as a defense system, but as an asset on a spreadsheet to be leveraged for a quarterly bonus. I remembered the first time he walked into my lab 3 years ago. He had looked around at the chaos of cables and monitors with a distinct look of distaste, checking his reflection in a dark monitor. "We need to scale this, Eric," he had said, smoothing his expensive suit. "Make it prettier. The government contracts don't care about the backend, they care about the dashboard." That was Ryan's style over substance, profit over protection. He had spent the last 6 months asking pointed questions about redundancy and external access. I should have seen it coming. He was fishing for the keys so he could lock me out of my own house. I stared at the patent a second longer before sliding it into the box. In the back corner of the bookshelf there was a small locked drawer. I'd only opened it once. That was the day I signed off on the legal code with Bill Hart, the founder, Ryan's father's partner, back when Helen was still a damn garage startup with 6 employees and a leaky breakroom sink. I pulled out the folder inside. The thick navy blue paper tabs were still sharp. IP SEC Legal Langston Hart Final Draft. Clause 12.7 was buried on page 89. It was a tiny little paragraph, no bold font, no bullet points. It looked like a typo if you didn't know what you were reading. Bill and I called it the mirror clause. Ryan's legal team hated it back then, claiming it was redundant. But Bill overruled them. He basically said that if any transfer of Sentinel's intellectual property wasn't logged in the Federal Digital Ledger and verified by a key signature chain, the system would trigger a reversal. Not a freeze, a reversion. Ownership, access, rights, everything would bounce back to the original holder. That clause didn't just live in the paper contract. It lived inside the code itself, layered deep like a tripwire, hidden where only I could find it. Sentinel would crawl its own signature files every 24 hours. If anything didn't line up, it flipped the switch. Ryan thought he was the predator today. He thought he was the shark. He had no idea he was swimming in a tank I had rigged to drain the moment he took a bite. I slid the folder back into the drawer, locked it, and dropped the key into my coat pocket. There was no ceremony, no final toast or memory lane crap. I just walked over to the window and looked out across the Hellion campus one last time. It was all so clean-cut. The buildings with their fake sustainability banners, a courtyard full of people pretending to build something new while standing on top of what I'd already finished. They could steal my title, lock me out of my account, delete my credentials, and slap their name on my code. But Sentinel knew the truth, and so did the clause. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. One line from an unknown number. They moved the PR to tomorrow. Everett's calling it an acquisition. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Ryan was already in freefall. He just hadn't hit the ground yet. I packed the last drive, closed the box, and walked out. I left the lights on. Let them pay for the power. I crossed the street and went into Finch and Oak, the coffee shop across from Hellion's main tower. I took the back corner booth, the same one I used to sit in during all-night builds when the servers were cycling. Nobody knew my face here, just the guy who drank his coffee black and stayed off the Wi-Fi. The screen behind the counter lit up with Hellion's press stream. No countdown, no preamble, just Ryan Everett walking out with that plastic grin, sleeves rolled up to look industrious. a microphone already clipped to his lapel. He looked like a YouTube ad come to life. I ordered a large coffee, grabbed my notebook from my bag, and took a seat with a clear view of the TV and of the glass facade of the Hellion building behind it. Ryan launched right in. "Today we mark a new chapter in cyber defense," he said, his voice oozing confidence. "Hellion Systems has secured exclusive ownership of Sentinel Core, the most advanced adaptive firewall ever built. This acquisition strengthens our commitment to redefining national security infrastructure." No mention of me, no nod to the architect, no footnote, he didn't even flinch. I sipped my coffee, opened my notebook to a blank page and started writing. Claimed ownership via internal transfer. No federal verification mentioned. Use the word exclusive twice, opens liability for contract disputes. No timestamp declaration on ownership. Breach of clause 4.3 timing rules. He kept talking, waving his hands like he'd coded it himself. Sentinel was designed in-house by a team of brilliant Hellion engineers. I actually laughed out loud. The barista looked over confused. I waved it off. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Federal reg check triggered. Sentinel's signature doesn't match system registry, you were right. I didn't even hesitate. I typed back one line, asked them about Sunrise. I didn't watch Ryan on the screen anymore. I watched the glass behind him. There he was, reflected perfectly in the mirrored tower, tall, sharp suit, hands mid-gesture, standing in front of something he thought he owned, like a king posing in front of stolen land. I took another sip and underlined a note in my book, violated security signature process, automatic clause exposure risk. If they'd even glanced at the back-end ledger, if they had done even basic due diligence instead of rushing to push me out, they'd see the flags already stacking up. Ryan moved into the Q&A portion. The first softball question came from a planted tech blogger. What's next for Sentinel now that it's officially Hellions? Ryan smirked. We've already begun internalizing its protocols and expanding the platform. Sentinel Core is the foundation. What comes next will be proprietary. Proprietary, wrong word. I circled it twice in my notes. Proprietary only applies if the chain of custody matches the registry, which it didn't, which it couldn't. My phone buzzed again. This time I let it sit. I wasn't ready for calls yet. Instead, I looked through the glass at that building. Floor 34, where they moved the Sentinel servers. Floor 36, Ryan's corner office. He probably still had the fake plant I gave him 6 years ago, back when I thought maybe he wasn't just some legacy brat playing CEO. Ryan turned back toward the cameras to close out. Hellion has always believed in innovation through strength. Sentinel is ours now, and it will keep this country and our clients safer than ever. That was it. They cut the feed. The barista turned the volume back down and changed the channel to a music mix. I closed my notebook, tucked it back into my bag, and left the empty cup on the table. On my way out, I glanced one more time through the glass. Ryan's reflection still lingered in it like a ghost. Back in my apartment, the lights were off except for the soft green glow of my old terminal screen. No Wi-Fi, no Ethernet, not even Bluetooth. This machine had been offline for over 6 years, isolated by design. I sat at the kitchen table barefoot, drinking burnt coffee out of an old Hellion Systems mug. The logo was chipped, the handle cracked. I kept it anyway. It felt fitting. The clock on the terminal read 2:03 a.m. A second timer glowed just below it, ticking towards sunrise. 6:17 a.m. That's when the vault would open. I reached under the table and pulled out the hardline key. It was a solid-state jump drive built from scratch. No wireless interface, triple encrypted. I slotted it into the port. The terminal beeped once, then went still. I typed a single line. Run Sunrise Protocol XC. There was a pause, then the screen shifted. Black background, white text. Initializing Sunrise Protocol. Verifying clause 12.7. IP reversion safeguard, activating Mirror Vault, cross-verification initiated. The Mirror Vault was waking up. That clause didn't just live in contracts or databases. It was inside the dam system, coiled up like a sleeping viper. I didn't tell anyone I built technical safeguards beneath the legal clause, the Sunrise layer. The phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up anyway. Eric, it's Lee from Hellions L. Eggle team. Her voice was tight, breath short, like someone trying not to scream. They're panicking, the system's doing something. It's rejecting internal keys, reversing admin access. The infrastructure team is locked out. they found the clause. She hesitated. No, they don't know how deep the clause runs. They think it's just a credential glitch. Of course they did. They're planning a hard reset at 5:00 a.m., she added. Ryan thinks it's a credential sync error. I didn't say anything. She lowered her voice. Eric, is this you? I paused, then said, Clause 12.7 is executing exactly as written. Click, she was gone. I set the phone down. I didn't move. I watched the terminal run its checks line by line, each module flipping green as the signatures validated my ownership and invalidated theirs. It wasn't just software, it was truth buried in code. I didn't smile, I didn't lean back in satisfaction. There was no celebration here, just clarity. I didn't build this to take something away from them. I built it to make sure what I created couldn't be stolen. Even if I got erased, the system would still know who built it, what was real and what wasn't. They thought they pulled the plug on me, but I wired the damn current. And now they were standing in water holding the live wire. The screen flashed once. Ownership chain verified, system authority Langston Root, awaiting sunrise confirmation key. I stared at the final prompt, just a blinking cursor. I reached forward, pressed one key, enter, and then I sat back and let the machine do the rest. The dinner invite showed up 2 hours later, delivered via courier to my apartment door. Black text, gold trim. Celebrating Sentinel, a private executive dinner hosted by Ryan Everett. No apology, no irony, just pure corporate smugness. They assumed that whatever glitch was happening would be fixed by the tech team before dessert. They were so arrogant they couldn't conceive of a problem money or yelling couldn't solve. I RSVP'd yes. When I walked into the rooftop lounge at the Valencia that evening, every head turned, but not for long. Most didn't recognize me without a badge or a coffee stain on my shirt. I was just another suit to them now. That was fine. Ryan spotted me from across the room and raised his glass like we were old friends. Langston, glad you made it. He walked over and hugged me, actually hugged me, like he hadn't tried to erase my existence 48 hours ago. I smiled, cold and tight, wouldn't miss it. The room was full of Hellion brass and contractors. The same people who'd avoided eye contact in the boardroom were now laughing over champagne like they had built Sentinel themselves. Ryan clinked a fork against his glass. Let's raise one up, he said, standing tall at the head of the table, to progress, to protection, and to a Sentinel that is now officially ours. The table laughed and applauded, someone even whistled. I lifted my glass slow and steady. Hell of a thing, I said, my voice cutting through the applause. Just glad I backed up the system before sunrise. Forks paused midair, you could hear it, that tiny hitch in the mood, not full silence, just a ripple. A second too long before someone forced a chuckle. Ryan narrowed his eyes but didn't ask. He just sat back down and went back to pretending. We got to dessert, cream brulee with gold flakes, of course, when the elevator dinged. A courier in a gray uniform stepped out holding a red envelope. He walked straight to Ryan. Urgent delivery, Federal Registry. Ryan's hand hovered before he opened it. Then he slid the paper out, read it once, twice, and his jaw locked. He didn't say anything, but his face drained of color. I leaned over, calm and quiet, didn't line up hus. His voice was barely above a whisper, you. I stood up, pushing my chair in smooth and slow. No need to finish that sentence. The guests looked around, confused. A couple glanced at the envelope, trying to read it upside down. Ryan still hadn't moved. He looked like a statue of a man realizing he was made of sand. I straightened my blazer and gave him a polite smile. Tomorrow will be different, I said. Then I walked out, past the table, past the confusion, past the noise. They didn't know what was coming, but I did, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do to stop it. I didn't go home immediately after the dinner. I got in my car, loosened my tie, and just drove. I went past the city lights, past the industrial zone, through the dark open stretch where the road stops trying to impress anyone. The wind battered the windows, tires humming over the asphalt, steady, mindless. An hour out, I pulled into a rest stop that looked half abandoned. There were old vending machines, one buzzing fluorescent light, and no other cars. I killed the engine and sat there in the silence. The night was wide open. It wasn't peaceful exactly, just empty. No buildings, no signals. Just enough quiet to hear myself think. I pulled out my phone and tapped into the news feed. There he was. Ryan Everett was live on late-night media, standing in front of a backdrop of flags and steel. He must have rushed directly from the dinner to the studio. Hellion remains in full control of Sentinel Core, he said, smooth as ever, though I noticed a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. The system is secure, the ownership verified. Any rumors of rollback protocols or legal challenges are categorically false. He smiled like a man who still thought he had time. And standing next to him was Hellion's new senior counsel, Janet Kruger. I leaned back against the headrest and shook my head. So that was their big move. Bringing in the only person who knew how deep the legal clause went, hoping she'd find a backdoor. Except she wouldn't, because I never told her about the vault, or the encryption layer, or the shadow protocol that triggered on a ledger mismatch. The screen lit up with a notification from my remote terminal. Cross-verification complete, ownership structure reverted, final system sync in progress. It was done. I stared at the phone, my thumb hovering over the control panel. One tap and I could stop it, freeze the protocol, roll it back before sunrise. Part of me wanted to, not for them but for me, to prove this wasn't about revenge, that I hadn't let bitterness turn into something toxic, that I could still walk away without burning it all down. But then I looked at that screen again. I saw Ryan standing next to the woman who'd sworn Clause 12.7 would never be found, selling lies, faking confidence, still clinging to what they stole like it was theirs by birthright. And I realized something. This wasn't revenge, it was symmetry. They moved in silence, so did I? They buried the truth, I just dug it back up. I put the phone down and turned the key. The engine rumbled awake. As I pulled back onto the road, the first hint of dawn hit the horizon, just a line of pale gold breaking through the dark. I drove toward it. I got back to my apartment just before dawn. I didn't even take off my shoes. I walked straight to the balcony and pulled open the door. The cold air hit my face. The city was still asleep, the sky just starting to shift from black to slate blue. Coffee in hand, I stood there and waited. Across the river, the Hellion Tower lit up like a stage. Big press events were set up on the rooftop. Cameras, floodlights, giant screens plastered with Sentinel, the future of defense. They had no idea what was coming. My TV flickered on in the background inside the apartment. The live stream was already rolling. The anchor's voice was full of manufactured excitement. We are expected to finalize biometric authorization this morning, officially confirming Hellion Systems as the legal owner of Sentinel Core. Ryan stepped up to the podium. He had the same confident smirk, hair perfect, suit perfect, like he hadn't spent the entire night screaming at his IT department. Or maybe he had. Maybe he really thought he could talk his way past the laws of physics and code. He placed his hand on the biometric pad. Today we secure our legacy, he said. The screen froze. A half-second glitch, then static. Another flicker, and then it hit. Unauthorized input, ownership reversion triggered. Big red letters flashed across the giant screens behind him. Gasps erupted in the background. Someone knocked over a mic stand. Behind Ryan, the Hellion Tower itself began to light up with red warning strobes, not part of the event, but actual building emergency lights triggered by the server lockdown. The biometric pad went black, then another message popped up, this time inside my own apartment on the terminal I left running. License revoked, owner Langston Eric, registered root holder. No music, no confetti, just quiet confirmation. I took a sip of coffee. It was still hot, bitter. Down below on the screen, the press room was chaos. Reporters were yelling, tech guys were scrambling onto the stage, and Ryan was frozen at the podium with his hand still hovering over a dead scanner. He looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under him. Because I had. Not with sabotage, not with malware, with truth. I didn't cheer, I didn't pump my fist or shout, I just watched. I watched that building flicker. I watched the tower I built from the inside out blink red like it finally remembered who wired its heart. The system did exactly what it was built to do. It protected its creator. At 6:42 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number, no caller ID, but I already knew who it was. I let it buzz once more, then answered. Langston, I said. The voice came sharp, breathless. Eric, it's Charles Everett. Ryan's father, the chairman. He didn't waste time pretending this was a friendly call. I need you to restore access. Now, we've got federal inquiries coming in, banks are frozen, our internal systems woe. And authenticate, what the hell did you do? I walked back inside from the balcony and set my coffee down on the counter. I didn't do anything now, I said. Clause 12.7 executed at sunrise, fully automated. You authorized the conditions yourself when you signed the original security charter back in '09. That clause was never meant to be active, he barked. Bill Hart retired, that language was dead. No, it wasn't, I said it was buried, there's a difference. He exhaled hard, a sound of pure desperation. You don't understand what's happening on our end. We're losing millions by the second. Our defense partners are calling nonstop. The board is threatening legal action. Then you better show them the contract, I said. The one your lawyers never fully read. Everything that's happening is legal, precise, and verified. Charles's voice cracked with frustration. We gave you a platform, Eric. We backed Sentinel, paid for it, promoted it, and this is how you repay us. I stayed silent. He kept going. I warned Ryan not to rush that press event. I told him to hold off, but he wanted to make a statement. Yeah, I said he did. You're throwing away a company for what? Some twisted sense of revenge. I didn't touch your company, I said flatly. The vault never belonged to you. You could stop this, he said, his voice dropping to a plea. Right now, just flip the key back, we'll compensate, fold your rights into a new structure. We can fix this. I shook my head slowly, even though he couldn't see it. There's nothing to fix, I said. The system corrected itself. His tone changed, harder now. You're destroying everything. I paused just for a second, then I said I didn't destroy it. I built it to survive people like you. Dead silence on the line, then he hung up. No final threat, no offer, no goodbye. I stood there with the phone in my hand, the screen dimming to black. I thought about calling back for half a second, not to argue, just to hear how far they'd unraveled already. But I didn't. They'd already heard enough. By noon, every major outlet had its. Sunrise crash shatters Helion SYSDMS. Federal investigation into Sentinel ownership begins. Langston clause triggers $31 billion IP reversion. I sat on my couch, TV on mute, watching it all unfold like a rerun I'd already seen in my head 100 times. No volume needed. The headlines said enough. Helion stock plummeted 81% in 3 hours. Traders outside their Manhattan office were on the sidewalk, phones to their ears, faces sinking by the second. Their website went offline by 10:30. By 11:00, the federal seal had replaced it. Digital asset seizure pending review. At 11:42 a.m., I watched Ryan Everett get walked out of Helion's headquarters in a gray suit and handcuffs, still trying to hold his chin up. Reporters shouted questions, none of which he answered. Someone threw a coffee cup. It missed. I didn't flinch. The anchor came back on, reading from a just-released internal memo dated 13 months earlier, flagged from my original security report. It had my name on it. My warning, my digital signature buried by leadership. Never acted on. Suddenly, I wasn't the bitter ex-employee. I was the guy who tried to stop the crash. Social feeds lit up. Some called me a whistleblower. Others said I was a genius who outmaneuvered a billion-dollar firm. I didn't respond to any of it. I wasn't interested in vindication. This wasn't about my name getting cleared. It was about the system working the way I designed it to, no matter who tried to own it. My phone buzzed. It was Liam, an old apprentice of mine. Smart kid, grew up faster than most. He sent one line, "Is it really over?" I typed back, "Don't repeat their mistakes. Start again." No emoji, no signature, just that. I looked out my window toward the skyline I'd stared at every day for over a decade. Where Helion's logo used to glow bright above the tower, it was gone. Just a blacked-out panel where their legacy used to hang. 1 year later, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Langston Vault SYSDMS was etched in brushed steel across the glass. No tagline, no nonsense, just the name and the work. Sunlight cut through the tall windows of the new office. It had clean desks, cables still coiled, and the smell of fresh paint and burnt solder. It was the kind of space where real systems get built, not pitched. On the back wall, I had hung only one frames. Sunrise Protocol Adaptive IP Reversion System. Inventor, Eric Langston. No Helion logo, no footnotes, just the system in full light. Liam walked in, coffee in hand, hair a mess like he'd been up all night wiring something. Good. He looked around. Place feels real now. Oh, it is. He stood in front of the patent for a second, then turned. Do you ever regret how it ended? I didn't even pause. No, I said, justice doesn't need applause, it just needs light. His phone buzzed, so did mine. I glanced down, Confirmed, federal contract awarded. 8.3B Sunrise Security Network based on the Sunrise Protocol. Phase 1 deployment. He whistled, guess that means we're live. I nodded, walked past the frame, past the specs on the whiteboard and into the break room. I poured a black coffee. No ceremony, no one to toast, just work to be done. Outside, the morning hit the windows hard, clear and gold. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like it belonged. No headlines, no cameras, just the quiet return of truth.